get through.
Okay. Well, first things first. Oh, Pat, or I should say, by way of housekeeping items before I get into the actual program, one of the things I did want to mention is that this program is going to be recorded. So if you know somebody who was not able to attend the program and they want to be able to view it, it will be available for people to view. So with that, Pat, are we starting the recording now?
Yes, it started.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, first things first, let me introduce myself. My name's Vince Smith, and I'm with Valley Forge Audubon Society. And I would like to thank everybody for coming out tonight for our waterfowl identification program. Another little piece of housekeeping, we will have a series of questions at the end. With that, you can plug into the chat any of the questions you have along the way. By way of the waterfowl identification program, one of the reasons that we decided to do this program is not only that people requested it, but we thought it would actually be a pretty nice fit with our winter programming. We just had our program down at Barnegat Lighthouse to look at the Harlequin ducks, and we saw lots of cool ducks down there. And then we thought we would do this waterfowl identification program, which would be a nice fit for our program on the 25th at John Hines National Wildlife Refuge with Dorothy Bedford. So I thought that this would be a really nice piggyback to do 3 series of waterfowl programs. And I think it's because a lot of people are interested in waterfowl. We seem to get a really good draw for any of our waterfowl programs. From a personal note, when I first got into bird watching, I was not aware that there were any more duck species than mallards. So it was such a surprise to me when I first became interested in birds, where all of a sudden all these different species of ducks, which I never knew were right in front of me the whole time. And that's how I kind of, from a personal note, that's how I got interested in birds in general. Especially when you consider the number of potential species of waterfowl that you can see within this particular area. Between a 2-hour drive from here to the shore to the Delaware Bay, you could potentially see up to 38 species of waterfowl, which is pretty cool when you think about it. The other thing I think that is just really cool is to think that ducks themselves are, fairly close to the lineage of the theropods, which are the dinosaurs, to the point where there is recent evidence where they have found fossilized or they're almost birds. They're at the same time period as the dinosaurs. So during the Cretaceous, there's creatures running around that look like birds. They look like ducks in particular. Recent discovery in China where they found a species which basically is very similar in some of the morphologies that you would typically see in ducks. So ducks are just really, really cool in general. And with that, I think we'll get into the meat of our program. Let me just see here. Okay. First of all, what are we going to cover here? This is a presentation that's going to focus on the identification of the Anatidae family, and they are collectively known as waterfowl. These include the ducks. We're going to go over the dabbling ducks, the diving ducks. We're going to talk about geese and swans. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the little tricks that you might be able to use when it comes to identifying ducks. You're going to use things such as size and shape. There's a big difference between a trumpeter swan and a bufflehead in terms of shape and size. So we're going to kind of look at some of the different tricks, and then we'll try to look at some of the trickier identifications. We're going to look at some of the markings and the color patterns, as well as the different habitats. Some of their behaviors are going to be different. It's very different to see a shoveler or a green-winged teal versus a canvasback. They behave in a very, very different way, mostly because they're feeding on different food sources. We'll go through a little bit of their calls, and it is true. Not all ducks quack, excuse me. And And I think actually my favorite of all the ducks in terms of the call would be the widgeon, which to me sounds like a squeaky toy. So we're going to go through some of those different calls. Let's go to the next slide. A little bit of the duck anatomy here. We're going to start first at the right-hand portion of the screen, where we're going to start with the crown. All of these different markings that are represented here, there's different species which will show different parts that's kind of stand out. Like, for example, if you start on the bill, it turns out that the color of the bill is very, very important to identify certain species of ducks. In much the same way with warblers, you're looking for wing bars or no wing bars. When it comes to ducks, in many instances, if you can see the color of the bill, you frequently can figure out what group of categories you could potentially fit into. If you start at the top of the head, you have the crown. It turns out not only the color of the crown, but also the shape of the crown is real important. And that comes into play if we're talking about scalp, or if we're talking about some of the other different golden eyes and things like that. You have the throat, you have the breast, the sides, and the flanks. For example, off the top of my head, the flank of a northern shoveler is going to be like a chestnutty brown, chocolatey color. The other thing that gets really cool about ducks is they have this unique secondary patch, and this is their secondary feathers. So you have the primaries, which are the flying feathers, and then underneath the flying feathers are the secondaries. And there is frequently in ducks what's called a speculum. And in the case of ducks, the speculum is frequently very brightly colored, which is really cool. And then also, if you're looking towards the tail end of the duck, frequently the color of the tail is really, really helpful for identifying the birds. You also have the mantle and the neck. So for example, if you have a bird such as a pintail, northern pintail, you're going to notice that the neck is going to be this beautiful pattern of almost chocolate and white that just stands out in a very unique way. And of course, in the northern pintail, they're going to have a blue bill, which is really cool. So let's go to the next slide. It turns out that the duck's anatomy, their bills, are also a really good way to identify what species you're looking at. And there's incredible variations based on what they're actually feeding on. So if you look at the far left-hand side, the northern shoveler, you'll see this very broad, long, stretched out bill. And frequently when it comes to a northern shoveler, that bill, if they're ever like preening or they're rubbing the front of their breast with their bill, it's so long that it stands out that even at a long distance you can identify a northern shoveler just based on the length and the size of that bill. Next bird over we see is a common merganser. And common mergansers are fish eaters, and because they're fish eaters, they have these long, thin bills. And inside on the interior portion of that bill, there's a little bit of a serrated edge. There's a little bit of a projection that allows them to be able to grab slippery fish. And then on the right-hand side, we have a bird such as a surf scoter, which has this long or this large, hard, stout bill, which is used for grabbing shellfish off of rocks like mussels and things like that. And believe it or not, they swallow them whole, and it goes into their gizzards. And with a combination of the sands and the things that they're eating, that all just grinds everything up, and then they basically are able to then spit out the shell portion of it. Okay, the next thing is when it comes to a duck's anatomy is their swimming postures. Certain species of waterfowl are going to ride really high in the water column. Others are going to be lower, deeper into the water column. And then there's those that are in between. In the case of geese float really high on the water column. And then the diving ducks, they sit really deep into the water column. And then, of course, the dabbling ducks are in between. Dabbling duck we'll get into is typically the species when you think of a mallard. Also, when it comes to duck anatomy and geese anatomy, the body postures on land is really important. In the case of geese and swans, you will notice when they stand, almost dead center, counterbalancing the weight in the middle is where their legs sit. When it comes to the sea ducks, because they are propelling themselves with really strong back legs, their feet are going to be positioned closer to the rear. And of course, if you have like a ruddy duck, a stiff-tailed duck, that's even more awkward. It sits further back from the rest of the body. And then you have the dabbling ducks, which are basically closer to a goose in terms of the position of the leg when they're standing on the land. One thing I do want to mention is when it comes to duck molt, and it sometimes can get a little confusing because if you were to typically see any type of waterfowl in July, this is after the June, July, after the breeding season, ducks typically go through a radical molt. And when I say radical, it's a very extreme change from what they look like during the breeding season. During the breeding season, the ducks are going to be very bright when it comes to the males. The females are going to be their camouflage colors. But especially when it comes to the drakes or the males, you will notice that they are going to almost look unrecognizable in that molt period. And that molt period can be 20 to 40 days. And during that time period, they are completely grounded. They basically molt not only the down feathers, but they also molt their flying feathers, their primaries, which means they can't fly. Which is why if you ever go to the water bodies in June or in July and August, you're going to see these motley looking males, and they're not going to look like you would typically see in the wintertime. Whether it be a wood duck or a mallard, they're going to look very different at that particular time period. And they don't get their quote breeding plumage until the fall into the winter season. And that's when they mold out to their more typical of what we view as their patterns, their more typical patterns. There are exceptions to those that look kind of motley. If you see we'll show it to you, the long-tailed duck. Long-tailed ducks, they look great in any time of year. They have a very unique molt period in which they basically look totally different. You would think that they were two different species based on their changes in their molt. Incidentally, frequently when they would do the studies of geese up on the tundra, what they would do for early banding is they'd wait until all of the geese are in this time period, and they would actually rustle them up almost like cattle, and they would band them. And that's how they would do a lot of studies. They put collars on them or band them. They basically chase them down because they can't fly at this time. We're going to talk about first category we're going to talk about are the dabbling ducks. These are the puddle ducks. And in short, they're mainly small ponds, marshes, shallow water, and they usually feed by tipping up. So you'll actually see them wave their little butts up in the air, and then they come up, and then they go down. And then the legs are placed further back than the diving duck, which then makes it easier for them to lift directly from the water to the air. You'll notice when it comes to diving ducks, they usually have to patter across the water. Dabbling ducks can spring directly from the water straight up into the air. And many of them do show that speculum, that bright colored speculum. And they also are known to hybridize. If you ever want to have a fun little thing to do, look up pictures of duck hybrids. Ducks sometimes mate in the most crazy looking ways. And, you can see, I've actually seen wood ducks with mallards and things like that. In particular, ducks are notorious for hybridizing with each other. The one thing I do want to mention about the dabbling ducks, and it is a little bit of a conservation point, and that has to do with the majority of these dabbling ducks are born in the pothole regions of North America. And the pothole regions are a stretch from Alberta down to northern Iowa, and it's a span of area where the glacial till reached its limit. And basically what happened was in the Midwest, northern Midwest, there were these giant icebergs, which basically were left in place, and when they melted, with all that weight, they created these ponds or pockets. And what happened is they don't drain out to anywhere; they just kind of sit there. And when the snow comes and the rains of the spring, basically they fill up, and that is known as the duck factory. That is where the majority of these dabbling ducks are born. And it is actually the reason why that was one of the first targets when it came to conserving and protecting the birds. They had to stop the shooting because by the turn of the century, the majority of the waterfowl were just decimated by market hunting. And when they finally put in the laws, the protection of the pothole regions was really, really important and continues to this day, to the point where there's groups like Ducks Unlimited, and there is also the National Wildlife Refuge System, which was instituted to not only protect them at their breeding, but also in their migratory period. Okay, we're going to jump into our first standard, and we start first with the mallard, because this is typically the duck that everybody in this region is most comfortable with. Of course, the males in the breeding season, you're going to have this yellow bill, this green head, the chocolate on the front of the breast, and then the gray tones to white tones on the flanks. And of course, the female is these brown color tones with a particular orange bill. It's usually an orange bill. And you can see the picture on the right-hand side, you see the mallard with the really bright speculum, which is that bluish color offset by the white lines. And then you'll notice on the mallard, you have the white tail, but look at the little tassels of curly tail of black that's offset with the white. Interesting note is that all domestic ducks, with the exception of Muscovy, originated from the mallard breed. This is a species that is from the northern hemisphere. So that means there's mallards in Europe, there's mallards in Asia, and there's mallards in North America. So they basically cover the whole northern part of the globe. And again, these were the ones who were mostly used for domestication. Probably in Asia is where they were domesticated. Let me just play a little quack here. I think everybody has heard that one before. Oh, incidentally, getting back to mallards originally did not nest in this region. This species would have been the species that would have nested in our region back 100 years ago. The black duck would have been the species that would have nested here. Looks some ways similar to the mallard, but you'll see this much darker pattern on all parts of the body, up into the right above the breast, where there's a transition there. And the bill on a black duck is going to be this bright yellow. But the real trick when it comes to identifying a black duck, especially if they are flying, is it is the only duck where the whole body is completely brown and dark, which is offset by those very bright wings, which you can see in the second picture there. And then the female, she looks in some ways similar to the male, except her colors are a little bit muted and her bill is much more of an olive color. And then you can see too, on the picture of the bird in flight, you'll also notice that the speculum tends to be shaded a little bit more to the darker purple range, and it's not as offset by white as the mallard. And as I said, this is a species that originally probably nested in southeastern Pennsylvania. Last region I knew of in southeastern Pennsylvania was actually down at John Hines. That was when I first started bird watching. They still nested down in those regions. And they do frequent South Jersey. They nest on a regular basis down in South Jersey. The one thing that's interesting is that black ducks are being hybridized with mallards to the detriment of black ducks. And the reason for the split may have been, for the species, may have been related to a type of black fly that lives in especially the eastern part of the North America, that actually produces a parasite that is toxic to mallards, which black ducks are resistant to. And unfortunately, we destroyed all the clean. Black flies need really clean water, and it turns out that the what do they call it? The black flies were decimated, and in the process, the mallards moved in, and then they hybridized on a regular basis with the black ducks. And right now, you have to go to places. The big category is like places north of here is more the case, and the coastal marshes. And let's play a little call here.
Vince,
Yes.
I think you need to turn up your volume a bit.
Oh,
'Cause it's
okay.
kind of hard to hear.
Let's see if I can find my volume. Let's see. Let me see. How's that? Is that good? I think I'm as high as I can go. Okay. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Can everybody hear me now? Can you hear me, Pat?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. It's just the duck calls we can't hear.
Okay. Okay, I have them up as high as they go, so hopefully it's better now. Next we're going to get into is the gadwall. Gadwalls are actually one of my favorite ducks, mostly because it was probably the first one besides mallard that I ever identified. And the males have this incredible grays and browns and black feathering. And then if you look at the especially on the breast as well as the flanks, it's almost like they have these scales, the way the pattern of the feathers lie. And of course you have the brownish head. Just a really pretty duck. And the other thing that they have is there's almost like a cinnamon. You can see it right here at the top here. There's almost cinnamon color that comes in at the edges of the secondaries to the primaries. Just a really pretty duck. And of course, the female looks in some ways like a mallard, but she's a little bit leaner. The real trick I always find when it comes to identifying a gadwall is these gray color tones, and then look at the what I call the butt. The butt on a gadwall is going to be black, and it really stands out. Really stands out. And again, you're going to look for these on small ponds with lots of vegetation. And then here's their call. The next dabbling duck we're going to talk about is actually another one of my favorites, and this is the pintail. Just a very elegant duck, very slender, both the bill as well as the neck in particular. Beautiful gray tones in an intricate pattern, as well as the male will have that blue bill, as well as the chocolate head with the white on the edges of the throat. Just a really interesting duck, and you can really pick them out when they fly because of that pintail. It's very long and it really stands out. The females are these gray, brownish tones, and again, they do have a hint of a bluish gray bill. And this is a duck that frequently the shape of the neck and the head is going to be a real key for being able to identify when they're laying out at a distant pond. That his lines are always very lean and thin. Just a really pretty duck. These are again found across the northern hemisphere as well. Gadwalls are the same way. Gadwalls are also found across the northern hemisphere, and northern pintails are also found. So if you go to Asia or you go to Europe, they also have pintails. And let's play the call.
Yeah, none of the calls are coming through, unfortunately.
Okay.
Even though we tested them out beforehand.
Okay. I'm sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll just jump here to we'll just jump here to the next one. We're gonna go with the American widgeon. Old name for this was bald plate, was the old name for this species. Now it's the American widgeon. Has a white forehead, again, where the forehead comes into play. The bluish bill has that green behind the eye, the grays on the throat, and then this almost cinnamon color on the body. Yeah, really pretty dark black butt on the end. Not nearly as, doesn't stand out as much as when you have a gadwall. Female is going to have that same color tone on the bill, grayish head. Everything's just a little bit muted. These are, a little bit smaller than a mallard with round heads. They're, let's see, they quiet lakes and marshes, and I'll play. Let's see, diet consists of a higher proportion of plant matter than other ducks, and you can sometimes see them in the farm fields. One of the things you can check for when you have a widgeon in flight is this white pattern on the front top portion of the wing. And then if you look at the speculum is going to be green. I did forget to mention that when it comes to gadwalls, you're going to look for, they have a white speculum, which is a little bit different from this species. This is the top half of the wing that is white. When it comes to a gadwall, you're going to see the white on the speculum. Let's go to the next one. Just in case you're on the coasts and you see one of these, Eurasian widgeons do come into to the eastern Atlantic. Also in the western, but the ones coming into the eastern Atlantic are most likely coming from Iceland. And similar pattern that we saw with the American widgeon, except the Eurasian widgeon is going to have this rusty head instead. Females are just very similar to the female American widgeon, just a little bit darker in tone, a little bit rustier in tones. You typically are going to find them with American widgeons when you do see them. And again, rare visitor to both coasts, but they do show up annually. Another one of my favorites, of course, is the shoveler. Shoveler, that big long bill I was talking about, green head. And of course, that green head is offset by that bright yellow eye on the male. And then you're going to have the flanks, which has this bright chestnut tone. A little bit smaller than a mallard. In the female, everything is going to be similar to a mallard, except look at the size of that bill. That bill is humongous, and it really stands out in any of their positions. And you will frequently see shovelers basically scooping duckweed and things like that from the top of the surface. They're not as much tipping down, even though they will do some dabbling. They will also, if the duckweed is available, they'll just basically shovel it across the surface of the water and pick it up that way. What's really cool about the shoveler is the top half of the wing is beautiful blue with the bright yellow speculum. Excuse me, not yellow, bright green speculum. And it just really stands out when they're in flight. They're just a really, really pretty duck. Again, these are all coming mostly from the pothole region. And flocks sometimes will swim in circles together to stir up the food. So you will see them in a big, big group. Next up is a little bit smaller than the shoveler, and this is the blue-winged teal. Fairly small. It does have a fairly long bill in comparison to our next species, the green-winged teal. But this is the second most abundant duck in North America. And I forgot to mention that majority of these ducks are nesting towards the northern areas north of us. And the reason they're nesting to areas north of us is because that's where a lot of ponds and puddles are. So any places where the glacial movement took place, there was left these ponds. And this is actually a species that does tuck deeper down into the center part of the country. And the males have these blue head with the white crescent, with that brown scallopy on the side. Very, very pretty duck. And the female has the a black line through the eye, as well as a white line above that black line. Very similar pattern on the wing to the northern shoveler. but this is a much smaller duck. Let's go to the next one. Next is the green-winged teal. Green-winged teals are even a touch smaller than a blue wing, especially when it comes to the bill. This is supposedly one of the fastest flying ducks out there. And the males have that chestnut brown with the cinnamon brown, chestnut brown with that green stripe. And then the two white stripes that you see here, there's one here at the intersection between the side and the breast, and then there's this other section here back towards the tail. That really stands up, especially in the breeding season. And if you look here, you can see the green speculums really standing out on the female. They're, especially if they're sitting next to a mallard, you will definitely see the size difference. You'll see the size difference of it. Okay, the next dabbling duck is going to be the wood duck. Now, this is a duck that didn't always nested in our region. It was actually fairly common back 100 years ago, in comparison to some of the other ones. And of course, the male just always stands out with that crest, the greens offset by the whites, the tan flanks, and then that kind of burgundy chest, which really is just significant. The female is unique in that she has that little teardrop eye, little white around the eye that really stands out. And the male wood duck has that bright red eye. In flight, though, what's really cool is if you look at the tail, they always stand out because they have that very long tail. And they fly over, they'll make this whistling sound as they go. This is a cavity nester. So this is a species that's going to find an old woodpecker hole or a hole in a tree, and that is where it's going to lay its eggs and raise the youngsters, or I should say at least hatch out the babies there. And then, of course, they plop on out of the box. All the other ducks that we talked about so far, they all nest in marshes and things like that. This is a species that is a cavity nester, and we're actually going to be talking about others coming further down that are also cavity nesters. Okay, and now we're going to get into the diving ducks. These are found in deeper water. Some people used to call them the bay ducks, and they feed by diving, not necessarily, but they will dabble, excuse me. And then they have smaller wings and heavier bodies. And of course, the legs are further back in the body, which allows them to be able to project themselves through the water. Most of them do require a little running start in order to get elevated. So you'll see them patter across the top of the water. And then their diet, some underwater plants, some shellfish, some fish, and other prey. So they have a wide mix of food which they're picking up. And the habitat and the bill shape may vary accordingly, and we'll actually see some of those differences in the bill. The first one we're going to talk about is the canvasback. Canvasback, the male is on the left, female is on the right, and you have this ski slope bill that's really particular on a canvasback, canvasback in general, as well as the red eye on the male. Light colored body offset by a chest that is going to be like a dark charcoal. Female is basically similar in shape. The pattern or the color patterns are just much more muted because most ducks are sexually dimorphic. The males and the females are very different. The theory for that is that is so that they can lay on the eggs and not be as visible. And the males have the option to be able to be a little bit more gaudy. Let's see, these are rarely go to dry land, and they even sleep while floating and build their nests in masses of vegetation. And they breed on small lakes, deep water marshes, bays, and ponds. This is actually one of those species in that pothole region. Most of them are coming from that part of North America. And that would be the same for this species too. The redhead is also a species that is noted for the pothole region. They don't have as much of a steep slope or a ski slope type bill as the canvasback. They also have a kind of like a bluish gray bill with a white and then black tip, and it kind of stands out with and they also have that orangey eye. If you look at the flanks as well as the back, you'll notice that it is a little bit darker and more gray than the canvasback that we just looked at. And of course, the female is duller in all aspects. She has a little bit of an eye ring there. And these tend to be on larger lakes. Next up is the, oh, by the way, I should have mentioned the ringbill gull, or ringbill. Excuse me, the canvasback and the redhead are both North America exclusive species. The ringneck duck is also a North America exclusive species. You're going to see the male on the left, female on the right. You have that three-tone bill, black tip with white. Then you have the kind of grayish, bluish tone. Dark head, and then the female you're going to see right below the bill where it meets the face. You'll actually see there's a white little crest there. Yeah, they inhabit the small ponds and wetlands, and in the breeding season you will usually see the pairs together, but in winter they'll gather in large flocks, and in real shallow ponds is typically where you'll find them. And they do have a major issue with they pick up a lot of the shotgun pellets and are susceptible to lead poisoning. Now, this is one of those cavity nesting species. These are species that are going to nest up more into the boreal parts of North America in cavities in trees. Next up, we have ruddy duck, and the ruddy duck. Stiff-tailed duck is another one. The male is on the right, female is on, excuse me, male is on the left, female is on the right. Blue bill, white cheek, black head, cinnamon brown, just a really cool duck. Female has, just everything's real muted in comparison. Not as much color on the bill, more grays. The one thing that always stands out for a ruddy duck is that stiff tail, which frequently is in an up position. So you will frequently see them stick that tail up. They are better swimmers than flyers, and you will see them just duck and dive under when they're threatened. Yeah, to attract the females, the males will beat their bills against their neck so hard that it forces air through the feathers and creates a swirl of bubbles that end in a belch. So these are actually one of my favorite ducks out there. Next up, we have the common goldeneye. Males have that green head with a bright yellow eye, very distinctive white cheek mark, and it's actually below the eye in a round circle. Females are a chestnut brown on the head, chocolate brown on the head with a gray body. Really cool ducks. They actually used to be winter residents on the Schuylkill River about 25 years ago. They have kind of declined since that time period. Typical breeding sites are lakes with clear water, offering clear, good visibility, a little bit of vegetation there. Yeah, they're actually really cool. These are one of those cavity nesting species. They are Northern Hemisphere. So this is a species that can be found in Europe and in Asia also, along that same band of the, what do they call that? The boreal sections of the Northern Hemisphere. Next up, we have the Barrow's goldeneye. This is a cool species in that you can frequently tell the difference between the Barrows and the common goldeneye in the position of the head. And we'll see that in more detail on a slide coming up. You'll notice that in this particular case, the position of the head is kind of tilted forward, kind of has almost like a Neanderthal look to it as it kind of projects out to the front. This is tends to be the color tone is more bluish tones. And I should mention that a lot of the colors that you see in ducks is based on iridescence. So what that means is that depending on the angle of the light, the color will change. So sometimes you will look at it in one direction and it might look green, and another direction blue. But typically, when it comes to barrows, it's more of a purpley than the green that you see on the common goldeneye. And 90% of the 90% breed in the winter, breed in winter in North America. There is a small population off of Iceland, actually. And sometimes they'll stray over, but there is a small population in Iceland. This is a species that is more tailored towards the what do they call that? A little bit further north than the common goldeneye, and also more coastal, and also it almost exclusively spends time on the coasts. So it's a little bit more of a saltwater rather than freshwater. One of the favorites, if anybody ever goes down to the Schuylkill River in the wintertime, these guys will be plutzing around like crazy. You have the bufflehead. We have the male on the left, female on the right. That iridescence, bluish green, purple with the white back there on the back of the nape of the neck. And they have the capacity to, if they're excited, they can raise or drop that crest a bit so the white will actually fan out. The female is almost brown on the head with a white cheek patch right behind the eye. These guys, you'll see them pick up and run across the water as they're trying to get up off the ground. And this is also one of those cavity nesters, excuse me. And then, small bodies of water, you'll see them diving down, trying to grab different stuff on the bottom, especially aquatic insects or things like that. For those who went to the program on the 13th, we have the harlequin duck. This is actually just a stellar duck. It's a small sea duck with a short bill. They can bob around like corks in some of the swiftest currents in the world. They actually breed on the Atlantic coast. They breed up in northern Quebec in these fast-running streams, torrent streams. And of course, those who took the trip down, we had like major winds, and they're out there just plugging around like crazy as if there's no problem at all. When it comes to identifying the males, they just really stand out with those blue bodies, the blue head, which is offset with those white patches, both at the cheek as well as down around the neck and the body. Just a stunning duck all the way around, as well as I forgot to mention the reddish tone towards the tail. Mostly found in rivers in the breeding season, and mostly coastal. These are guys who are eating those shellfish and things like that. Next up is the long-tailed duck. For those who went down, we saw a whole lot of these guys. This is a species that is from the northern hemisphere. And it is a small sea duck with a small bill, with a very complex molting pattern. And we'll show you some of the differences. If you would see them in the winter season versus the summer season, they look like totally different species. You'll notice that, especially in the case of the winter, you have the long tail is almost always there when it comes to the season, winter season as well as the breeding season. But you'll see that pink bill. You'll notice that the crest of the head is white. Just these patterns of white off of dark, just really stunning on the male. And of course, the female is much more muted, as most of them are, with a lot more browns in there. And then this is what the long-tailed duck looks like in the summer season. So the species, or the bird on the left, is the male during the breeding season, and then the female on the right is what it looks like in the non-winter season. Almost look like totally different ducks. It's almost a flip pattern. It's just stunning. They breed in the Arctic tundra. And again, they span from Russia to Alaska. The old name was the old squall. Next up is the scaups. We're going to talk about the lesser scaup, and we're going to talk about the greater scaup. Lesser scalp is North American, exclusively in North America. The greater is Northern Hemisphere. Let's say the lesser scalp is going to be more interior. It's going to be more freshwater. The greater scalp is going to be more towards the coast. This is one where the position of the head will become very helpful when it comes to identifying them. The males have these bright yellow eyes offset by a glossy black head, which in certain lights can kind of change color a little bit, go into a purpley tone. Females are brown overall, and of course you have that white patch at the base of the bill where it meets the face. They're found in large lakes, reservoirs, and estuaries. Let's see. Yeah, and here's another big trick when it comes to identifying the scalps is how dark, how much of a contrast you see on the mantle and the back here, as well as the flank. You're going to notice a little bit of a difference between the lesser and the greater based on that. Okay, and here's the greater scalp, and you'll notice just how much crisper that flank off of the mantle is on the greater. The position of the head, greater scalp, are going to have more of a flat head. Again, the head pattern can appear more green, and then the eye sits out, that bright yellow eye sits out, and very similar to the lesser, the female is going to show that kind of brownish tone on the body, rustier tones towards the head, and then the white around the bill, which really does stand out. Again, these guys are typically going to be more towards the coast. You're going to see them more towards the coast. And also when they in flight, you can sometimes see a difference in the contrast between the how much white is showing here. Generally, this portion here is usually what really stands out if you have that bird in a scope at a position. And then here's just what we were talking about with the shape of the head. Sometimes, it really stands out here on the here, let me just move this up. The greater scalp, this head here, more toward a flat top here. See how it kind of has a flatter top, and here it almost looks like it bumps up a little bit. In the case of the lesser, the shift on the color tone is going to be more towards the purple. The greater is more towards the green, but here's the real distinction on this flank. Look how clean that line is versus this bleed line that you see here on the flank. Typically, when I see interior portions, when I see scalp, it's typically going to be lesser. It's typically going to be lesser. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. Next, we're going to go, another diver is the eiders. Male eider is on the left, female on the right. The big key for identifying the eiders is the shape of the bill. It's very unique shape of the bill. And of course, if you have an adult male, he's going to really stand out with this particular pattern. We have this black here at the line, this yellowy wash, this mostly white off of a dark bottom. Really stands out. And of course, the female are going to be these cinnamon browns. Really kind of cool looking birds. They nest from approximately Maine all along the northern hemisphere. Europe, they nest all the way to like Norway and places like that. Typically, they're going to be more to marine coasts is where they're typically hanging out in the wintertime. They nest up on grasses and mosses further north of here. Okay. Next up is the king eider. Male to the left, female to the right. Look at that bill on the male king eider. Just a very unique species. They do on occasion come down as far as Jersey, not super frequently, but occasionally they do. Typically, they're going to be a little bit further north of our area. that orange really stands out. And then again, the pattern, we have the dark body, the white chest, and then this contrasting pattern here between the butt and the white pattern right heading towards the rest of the body. Females have a black bill and a mottled brown. They nest in the Arctic and really high up in the Arctic, and then they winter in the Hudson Bay and sometimes in the Great Lakes, and then also along the coasts. Really cool birds. Next up is the surf scoters. Surf scoter male has this white at the back of the head, white on the forehead, and this white eye, and of course that unique bill, which again is used to pick mussels off of the rocks and then swallow them whole and grind them on up. Mostly black. Most of the body is black, and the females are brownish tone with these two white marks, one behind the eye and one in the front. And they basically are, shallow freshwater lakes, and then in the boreal forests in northern Canada and Alaska is where they breed, and they winter on the coasts. They winter on the coasts. Next up is the black scoter. Black scoter, it's a medium-sized black duck, solid black body with that yellow front at the bill. Really stands out because of that. Does not have the same pattern as a surf scoter, and the bill is a very different shape. Female is going to be brown color, but then look at her cheek there. She has a white cheek with that brown cap. They also nest in the boreal forests and then head to the coasts, including both coasts, which are West Coast and East Coast. Let's see. Next up is the white wing scoter. This is the rarer of the scoters. And of course, the white wing stands out on both the male and the female. The two other scoters do not have that pattern at all. If you have an adult male, you're going to have this really standout white eye, which is really kind of cool. The other thing I do want to mention is that this species is significant. It looks significantly larger than the other two scoters if they're in the mix. Frequently, when the Sea Watch people are counting them, they can pick these guys up almost immediately because they look larger when they're flying in a V formation down along the coast. And yeah, they nest in freshwater lakes, wetlands in northwest interior of North America, typically a little bit further west than the other scoters. The other scoters are more draped across the whole northern hemisphere. These guys are a little bit more towards the west. So they are typically rarer on the East Coast than the other two. Next up is another diver is the mergansers. These are an interesting story because when I first started bird watching, the furthest south that they nested was the Poconos. And now they nest in all of the bodies of water, major bodies of water in southeastern Pennsylvania. They're in the Perky, they're in the Schuylkill, so you can now see them year round. It's a fairly large duck, about the size, a little bit smaller than a goose, but they're still pretty large. The breeding males have that green head, which is offset by that scarlet red bill, mostly white on the body, as well as with the chest, as well as the dark top there, the top of the mantle. The females are going to be kind of rusty colored on the head. And what's really cool is if you take a look at the head, there's that white patch right below the bill on a female common merganser, which is not on the red-breasted merganser, which we'll see in the next slide. Female is going to have that mostly gray body. The one thing you can always use to identify the mergansers in flight is that incredibly flat line, straight line from tail to tip of the bill, which is almost like a perfectly straight line, almost like it was drawn with a ruler when they're in flight. They're mostly fish eaters. That's why they have that little serration on the edges of the bill. They eat fish, crustaceans, mollusks. They are cavity nesters. They are cavity nesters, and yeah, it's actually a welcome, shall we say, breeding species to our area. Here is the red-breasted merganser, and we have the male. These are a little bit smaller and leaner than the common mergansers. We have the male on the left, female on the right. You see that green head with the red eye. You have the white throat with the rusty breasts, and of course that really pretty pattern of gray, white, and black on the body, as well as on the between the flank and the breasts. You have this almost these three white scallop pattern feathers, which is just really kind of unusual. What I always like about both the all the mergansers, but in particular the red-breasted merganser, is those tufts of feathers on the back of the hair, back of the head. They almost look like they've had product put in, some type of a product to be able to stiffen up and give them the right appearance. And that goes for both the male and the female. For some reason, they just kind of stand out. These are they don't necessarily nest in cavities. They actually will nest in like inland lakes and places like that. Fish are their primary food source, and they're really. It turns out they're really good and successful hunters for fish. Okay, next up is this species. Hooded mergansers. These guys have become pretty prevalent in our area, and they are also a recent nesting species to our area. They're a little bit smaller than the other two. The male has this very small bill, but look how big the head is. And of course, this white patch here. The only thing you can probably confuse it with is a buffle head, but it really stands out. It's just a touch. Oh, sorry about that. It's a touch larger than the buffle head. Has this beautiful cinnamon flanks here, this white breast, and of course they can raise and drop this crest depending on their mood and their attitude. So late in winter, when you see them courting the females, you actually see them kind of really fluff it up. Really nice looking birds, and really exciting that they're starting to nest in our area. The females, they're going to be, again, it look like they have product put in to make their hair stand straight up. They have the generally rusty tones that stick straight up as compared to the other two species, which are more towards the back. Duller gray, brown tones is going to be the female. Really, really cool birds. Now, we thought we would throw in here a couple things just so you know these are not ducks. So the bird on the top left, we have the American coot. They sit in the water high like that. They'll actually feed some ways similar to a duck, but when they do that little bob, you'll actually see them when they move through the water. They have a different style. They're almost head bobs. That's because they don't have their feet are not actually completely the toes or the pads are not completely fused together like a duck. The membrane, I should say, is not completely fused together, so they have a different shape. Colin gallinal, which you'll find down in any of the wetland areas. If you go to Hines, you might see something like that. And then, of course, we have the common loon, bottom left, and then the double-crested cormorant. These are not ducks; these are totally different families, but they're living a lifestyle that is comparable to what some of the ducks are doing. And these are also not ducks. We have the pied-billed grebe, top left. We have the horned grebe, top right, and then the redneck grebe in the bottom center. Typically, they sit a little bit lower in the water than some of the other ducks. Next up, we're going to talk about swans and geese. And they have a similar structure, similar habitats. The swans are the biggest of the group. The geese are larger than ducks. Some of the smaller geese can be pretty comparable to a mallard. We'll talk about those in a little bit. They don't dive, but they will dabble in shallow water. And the diet is mostly vegetation, grazing in fields and things like that. I always think of geese and, I should say swans and geese as being almost the equivalent of cows in terms of their lifestyle. And they undergo a single annual molt, replacing all the body feathers, tail feathers shortly after the nesting season. And then this will give you a size comparison. You have the trumpeter swan, the tundra swan, the snow goose. First of all, the tundra swan is the smallest swan, and we see them locally in migration. For those who have taken the trip out to Middle Creek, it's amazing to see these species. Typically, you're going to have a black bill with that little white at the lure, which is really kind of cool. And the mute swan is going to be much more of an orange bill when it comes to the comparison to the excuse me, tundra swan. And the trumpeter swan is the largest, and that's going to be the longer neck, black face, facial skin, includes the eye with the dips in the V. It's uncommon, but increasing in the east. And part of that is because of conservation efforts, they have actually kind of expanded the range of the trumpeter swan, which is really good news. The mute swan is invasive. And I love this picture here of the three together to get a comparison of the shape of the neck as well as the bodies. You can see the size difference, the tundra swan being the smallest, mute swan being next, and then the trumpeter swan being the largest. Really cool. For those of you who have taken the Middle Creek run, it's really worth it. It's really a good trip. Then we have geese. Most common that we see in this area is the Canada geese. Canada geese have that white chin strap offset by the black, typically a gray front and a brownish body. Again, there's many different subspecies, typically grassland adapted birds. They do very well in our region. As a matter of fact, our region, southeastern Pennsylvania, is like the main wintering ground for the Canada geese that are coming from Quebec. They come down into our region in the wintertime. There's also the local resident geese, which breed here all year long. And these geese were the original birds that were let go from the old hunting days when they would actually use live decoys to attract the birds into the area. These were birds that had clipped wings, and when the game laws came into play, they basically couldn't use them anymore, and they basically let them go, and some of the species continued to breed. The cackling goose looks just like a Canada goose, but it's significantly smaller. Smaller bill, and sometimes there'll be a white ring around the neck here. And God bless, we have a couple volunteers for our Christmas bird count who religiously go out and pick through all the Canada geese to find the cackling geese. It's for those who are very patient. Next up is the snow goose. Snow goose all white with black wingtips. Just be aware that there is a blue morph, which is basically a dark body with these blue wings, blue top portion of the wing with a white head. They really do stand out when they show you. The blue morphs are more for the central part of the country, but we do on occasion get them coming through our area. I actually saw one in Green Lane this past season. The Ross's goose is very similar to the snow goose, but it is significantly smaller, much like the cackling goose is a smaller version of a Canada goose. And these are separate species, by the way. So you can tick them off your list as being separate species if you see them. Again, the bill much smaller, and also the body is so much smaller. And they also come in a dark morph. All of the snow geese, whether it's cackling or Ross, These are birds that are breeding up in the high Arctic areas. And then here is the birds in flight. And if you'll notice the Ross goose on the right-hand side, look how stubby that bill is in comparison to the snow goose on the left. For those who went to the Barnegat trip, we had a chance to see some nice brants here. These are compact, short-necked, small geese with a black head, white necklace, and a rich brown body. They're really cool ducks, and they have a really cool sound. Typically, you'll notice that the birds on the west, brants from the west coast are darker in tone. Those in the east coast are a little bit lighter in tone. Did want to throw this one in here because on occasion we get greater white-fronted geese that come into our area. These are birds most likely from Iceland, on the Atlantic coast, and typically these are going to have orange, excuse me, orange feet and legs, and an orange bill with a white tip, as compared to the North American subvarieties of this species, which tend to have a pinkish bill. So if you take a look at the one here, you're going to notice that it has a pinkish bill, and then this one here has a more of an orange bill. A little bit more black on the belly on the Greenland race. And they do stop in every year. They do stop in to the East Coast. Next up, we're gonna.
We're inside a tree, 15 feet above a lake high in the Rocky Mountains. We're in a nest of wood duck eggs, hatching after a 30-day incubation. And we're here to witness a rite of initiation that is at once daunting and amazing. Even though the mom duck laid her 11 eggs on different days, she didn't start sitting on them till they'd all appeared. That way, they'd all hatch on the same day. The hatchlings get to spend their first night in the nest. One night, that's it. Enjoy yourselves, because tomorrow morning comes a big ordeal. Tomorrow morning arrives in a hurry. When the hatchlings first gaze at their mother, she's 15 feet below, calling for them to gulp, jump down to her. Can you imagine how much courage you'd need to take the plunge to mama? Your first day on the planet, never flown before, now having to leap the human equivalent of 30 feet or more. Wow, made it. None the worse for wear. The truth is, 15 feet isn't that big a deal. Some hatchlings have to leap 60 feet. Why would these hatchlings take such a leap? Well, if they stay in the tree, they starve to death. Yeah, that sounds like motivation to me. Mom and her 11 little hatchlings. After a rite of passage like this one, they're ready for absolutely anything.
Okay, I guess with that, let's go to questions. If anybody has any questions. Okay, somebody has a question here. I thought bird species can't interbreed. Well, it turns out that ducks do interbreed. They interbreed on a regular basis, depending on how close they are, in much the same way as in the case of a donkey and a horse, you can get a mule. These are different species which have close enough lineage where they do interbreed. It does not necessarily mean that they produce fertile offspring. In the case of some of the duck species that have hybridized, they are most likely fertile. Excuse me, infertile. there is a case where mallards and black ducks, when they hybridize, unfortunately for the black ducks, they are fertile. And if they continue to breed with mallards, they lose the genetic characteristics of the black duck. Let's see if anybody else has any questions. Which parent decides the interbreed characteristics? Huh. I'm looking to understand what you mean by that. Which parent decides interbreed characteristics? Yeah, somebody mentioned about the resources that you can use. There are some really wonderful resources out there. And the beauty is in today's world, you can actually buy these folded pamphlets, which are, shall we say, laminated. And they're laminated because if you're talking about ducks, you're talking about weather, so you want to keep them as dry as possible. So rather than bring a book out that, you know, will be wet, you can actually bring these laminated lists of all the duck species all lined up next to each other so you can compare. If you go to any store that has like Cape May Bird or any wildlife refuge, frequently you can purchase those pamphlets out there. And they're literally just these folded sheets. One sheet actually that's folded into numerous different plates, which shows all the duck species lined up. Let's see. Times of the day to see ducks. Well, one of the plus sides of ducks is if they are around, you can see them on those bodies of water. A lot of times when it comes to bird watchers, you know, they like to get up early in the morning to see the first crack of dawn. In the case of ducks, you can actually time it during the middle of the day. The one thing I will say is if you go to a coastal site, the tide is actually more of a factor than the time of the day. So if you're going to South Jersey, you're going to the Delaware Bay, what the tide is doing might have more of an influence. Let's see. If tundra swans and mute swans are in the same habitat, will they hang out together? The answer to that is yes. However, in the case of mute swans, they nest in this area. So if there are a pair bond of mute swans, they're probably not going to tolerate a tundra swan hanging around. In most instances, the tundra swans are going to be separated out and the mute swans would probably chase them because these tundra swans are all shifting to breed up in the tundra. So they're not going to, they're not there for competition to nest with the mute swans. They'll just move on their way to another source if they need to. Any other questions? Yeah. I guess we can, let's see. I only call it pie-bill grebe. Yes. Let's see if I can. Oh, I guess I can. See if we can go back. Yeah, so pie-bill grebe, which has almost like a chicken-like bill, these small little balls of brown, and you'll see them plop down and then they'll plop up, and you'll see they have an eye ring. These are a totally different species. These are not ducks. These are totally different species than a duck, as well as the horn grebe, and then the other ones here, the coots, the gallinal, and the double-crested cormorant. all of them are not in the same lineage of the ducks. Okay. Is there a spot in Bucks County where you would recommend to view winter ducks? Yeah, Lake Nakamixon would be a great spot. Also, if you are anywhere near the Delaware River, I know that the Tarrytown, there's Peace Valley, I think. What's the other? There's another lake. Is it Lake Galena? I think it's Lake Galena. Any place where you have open bodies of water. And of course, the way things are going as of late, we don't freeze over real hard. So we now have an increase in the amount of habitat available for wintering ducks. So anytime you have large bodies of water, you can scan it for ducks, and I can almost guarantee you're going to find stuff there unless there's a lot of hunting pressure there. Typically that's, so yeah, there's just a couple places. If you get anywhere towards Tarrytown, the Delaware River, where they have pockety ponds, you'll be able to pick up ducks. Places in Chester County to see ducks. Yes, Marsh Creek is a great spot. I guess Hibernia Park, they have a lake. I know I'm forgetting, there's one more off the top of my head. Any of those bodies of water, any large standing bodies of water, this time of year, you're going to find ducks. Let's see, any other questions? Oh, somebody had, somebody had mentioned about schedule of guided tours. I did want to mention that we, if you take a look at our website and also our calendar of events, we frequently do have running programs. So you are more than welcome to come to any of our programs, and they will be guided by one of our naturalists. Let's see, anything else? Any other questions? I bet if we give it another, let's see what our time is. Oh my word. Any other questions? Well, I think if there's no other questions. Somebody asked, where do the brants go in the summertime? Brants are actually nesting far up in the Arctic tundra zones. So they're going to go further north of here, and that is where they're gonna nest. Yeah, the first time I saw brants, I was amazed, especially if you get the places in South Jersey. There's certain locations where you will find more brants than you will find Canada geese. So it's really cool. Let's see, what is a duck? A few non-ducks look like ducks. Yeah, they have a so getting back to the shape of these birds. There's certain species which are totally different from different families, but because they share a similar lifestyle, they basically have common characteristics. So if, for example, if you ever look at the southern hemisphere, we have penguins. Well, if you go to the northern hemisphere, we have murres and razorbills, and they are in some ways very comparable in body shape. And the reason is because they are leading a similar lifestyle. So you're right, though, they do have similar appearance, but they are totally different families of species. Let's see. Okay. Okay, if there's no more questions, I'd like to thank Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in, Vince, to say for the person looking for an event schedule, our website is valleyforgeaudubon.org. And you can go to our events calendar and see what's coming up, and all of our events are free. We don't have a registration for our organization, and we don't have a registration fee to come to any event. So just come on out. We'd love to have you.
Yep. And as I said, I do want to plug again, we're doing a program down at John Hines National Wildlife Refuge on the 25th. 8:30 a.m. I forgot to mention it. 8:30 a.m. You can take a look at our calendar and get more details. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. And hopefully we'll see you out there for another program.